Hello and welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. This is a recorded session following our live stream. Kshira was a little bit late, but we're going to be joined by Kshira Saagar, the Chief Data Officer with Latitude Financial Services. We're going to be looking at understanding data literacy. What is data literacy and why it's important? Let me bring on Kshira Saagar. Kshira, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. How are you?
Very good. We were looking forward to this session, and you're sort of a leader in analytics. You've been awarded some awards as being a leader in analytics for the last few years. Maybe talk us into your background first, and then your role as a Chief Data Officer.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me first, and apologies for being late.
That's okay.
So I've always been in the data space. Ever since I started, like how you fall into love, I fell into data, and that's how it's always been.
Yeah.
So I've not done anything else in all my career. Growing up, I love math, and so I wanted to do a job where math was used. And so the first company that came calling said the tagline was "Do the math," and I'm like, this can't be a coincidence.
Nice.
And that's how it started. And so I've been in the data space since. A lot of my work's focused on helping businesses. The way I think about data is I help people make smart decisions or better decisions. And that's all I do for a living. It could be in the form of algorithms or dashboards or analysis. All of that's are tools to means to an end. The end is helping people make a smart decision and find an answer. That's what I do. And when I try to explain what I do for a living to my grandma or someone else, I tell them I'm the digital lost and found guy. If you lose something, I help you find it.
Nice. Or you're looking for something, whether you've lost it or not. Is it actually there? Now, I mentioned the award. You've been among the top 10 analytics leaders in Australia for 2019, 2020, and 2021. Maybe talk us into that, because I think that might paint a picture of where you fit in the industry.
So the association is called the IAPA, Institute of Advanced Analytics Professionals of Australia.
Got it.
So is a wing of the ACS, the Australian Computer Society.
Got it.
And what they do is every year they look at all the analytics leaders in the market. They do an assessment of what their contributions are and how they add value. And the focus is to show that analytics and data is also something that drives value, and to show to the executive leadership that it's a required skill set. And thankfully or luckily, I've been recognized the last 3 years, 2019 to 2021. So.
Right.
Which is a good validation of the work that we're trying to do and the value we are adding. So that's.
Well, I will say we're working with a data scientist who works with us a couple of days a week. Comes in and we just ask him multitude of questions of can we do this and can we do that and can we bring this in and can we get this live is another sort of key question there of what we want to know about our business and the different platforms that we use. When you're in sort of the fintech side, how do you sort of approach a data science project? And maybe even if I can go back to our topic of what is data literacy, there's the data science, but the literacy part is trying to get it so you can understand it. Would that be right?
Yeah. So for me, literacy is 3 parts, right? Literacy is one part. The first part is awareness of what we can and can't do. I think in the data space is one of the spaces where there's a lot of unknowns. People don't even know what we can't do.
Yeah.
And so that's the massive differentiator between somebody who is truly data-driven versus who's not. They don't know what they don't know. So that's most important, and exactly what, like you mentioned, asking the questions on what can we do, and that's one awareness. Once you have the awareness, then the next part is the education, which is trying to understand, yes, I have the awareness. Now, how do I get the skills to do what I need to do, or people to do what I do, or the partners to do what I do? And then the last one is the actual implementation of it, which is the data literacy part, which is implementing it and putting it into production, whatever have you. But I think a lot of people focus on the last part. It's almost solution mode. I'd like to think data literacy is all about first sitting down and having a chat, an honest conversation, saying, I'm in this industry. What are other people doing here that I don't even know that they're doing with data? And where do I start? And what am I missing? What am I not tracking? And so that's mostly what data literacy is.
Now, maybe also with the role of Chief Data Officer, that puts you into the C-suite. Are you up there at the C-suite and talking to the CEO, CFO, CIO?
Yeah, so that's part of my role, is to help the executives understand what we can do with it and look at it from a non-technological lens and more as an enabler. That's probably where I come in, because more often than not, data is looked as a technology extension where it's like engineering, you need to have it. But
Yep.
unlike that, we look at it as how can we use this as an asset, one, and how can we use this as an enabler and a differentiator where people can make better decisions every day. And the way I often think about it is 15, 20 years ago, computers were the differentiators. Anybody who used a computer could do work faster and smarter versus somebody who used paper. And now it's the same thing with data. Everyone knows how to use a computer now,
Yeah.
and not everyone knows how to use data now. So probably in 10, 15 years' time, everyone will be using data too. And so it will no longer be a separate field. It's something that everyone does every day.
I suppose the other one is the quality of that data and the systems that is creating the data and then making that talk. In our experience, the data scientist, so to speak, and I do it obviously. You treat it like a science? Obviously, it's one of those types of fields of discipline. But they're quite good in the coding too. You have to understand how to pull that data and also lay it out. And then we've also got the structured and unstructured. How much science is involved, and then the coding and the programming. The question is, how much discipline or multidisciplines do you find are becoming involved in data science?
It's very multidisciplinary. So I'll talk about how a data supply chain looks like. This is my favorite part, right? Where because it's often the data is often compared with oil. Data is the new oil or the old oil or whatever.
Correct.
So let's take the oil analogy, right? So there's oil buried under the ground. Somebody has to go first find where the oil is. So if you're in oil industry, you'd have to go do research, survey it, find out where to tap, where to drill. That's the data governance team. They go find out where data is, what should be done, how to bring it. Those people are not coders necessarily. They're the people who define the policies. They understand all the regulations that exist. What is the right data to bring in? And with privacy being a serious thing, understanding what to and what not to track and how to track. That's one discipline. Once oil is tapped, somebody has to bring the oil from the earth into a tanker or into a container somewhere. And they put pipelines in. Data engineers do the same thing. They know where to bring data from and where to put it in. So the data engineers are the literal engineers. There's a lot of coding involved. There's a lot of skills needed to do that. And that's where the software engineers play a really good role, because software engineers are really good at building systems at scale. They can come in, they can do the same thing that they do in the software engineering field to bring data from one point to the other point. So that's one. But once you bring the oil in, it's not just about just keeping the oil there. Right? Somebody has to do the process of turning the oil into petroleum and all the analysis and all the
right.
That's where the data science part comes in, is turning that oil into petroleum, into something that is more usable and useful and not just crude oil. So turning data into insights and action, either through algorithms or analysis or dashboards and what have you. But then the last part is the part where finding where to dig, taking the oil out, putting it into a petrol, converting it is all great. But if you can't sell it, it's completely useless.
Correct.
And
or the other one is we create so much plastics with it, it pollutes the environment, and we don't know what we're looking at anymore.
Exactly. So that's
it's a good analogy.
Yes. That part is that part of the supply chain, or the last part of the disciplines, where those are the people who know how to take data to people, how to take this algorithm to people. They're the decision enablers, if you want to call it, or decision scientists as they're calling it these days. Those are the people who do the last mile of data, where they say, hey, you have this dashboard, you have this problem, this is how you solve it. Or this is and so that's another discipline. So those are the 4 different disciplines within data that right now.
And where would you find that you fit in? Where's your strength and sort of interest and passion along that supply chain of data?
So in my role, I take care of all the 4 areas.
Yeah.
That's typically how we structure it. So we can get the value out of the asset end to end. But I typically find myself mostly playing in the data science, the last 2 areas of the supply chain, which is turning that into insightful action, and then convincing the business, the executive stakeholders, the board, and also the wider enterprise to use it. Because what I find is a lot of times with data, it's like buying an expensive Ferrari or a Porsche and then never driving it because you don't know how to drive it. That's what happens in our data systems. So people buy it, they park it in their garage and they don't use it. And I play really well in telling them how to use it, how to drive it, how to make money out of it.
And I don't know much about Latitude Financial Services, but how long have you been with the company? And maybe talk us through the sort of the insights into the role that you've had is this your first Chief Data Officer role?
Yeah, so it's my first role as a formal chief data officer, but in my
Yeah.
previous role, I did something similar, but it
Yeah.
was something else.
Yeah, but it's starting to get the recognition, right? Do you think it's, and we just spoke to Epicor about their cloud, their ERP SaaS model, and the uptake. They've seen a massive uptake in the cloud. We cover that quite a lot, and this is kind of following that. We've seen this with in cybersecurity. The chief information security officer is moving to that C-suite. Data is moving up there. Privacy is moving up there. Is this something that you've just noticed in the industry across fields? Are you talking to other CDOs in what you do?
Definitely, and I think in Australia at least, it's getting the recognition it needs eventually. It used to be a sub-discipline within a sub-discipline in
Yeah.
a particular area.
Used to be a business analyst or something like that, right?
Yeah. And now, because like I mentioned, there is not just one aspect of it, it's a multidisciplinary field.
Yeah.
So it needs its own space so that we can bring all the disciplines together and derive the value out of it.
How much are you talking to a CISO, a CIO, and also a CPO, the Chief Privacy Officer? Do you find you are have touch points with those? Does Latitude have a CISO, for example?
We have a CISO. So CISO is my peer, and so is the CIO. So she's also a peer. So we all work together. So every single problem we solve, we make sure that all of us are aligned on what we're trying to build and how it's going to help the commercial outcome of a particular problem.
That must be rewarding in its own right. Who has the loudest voice out of a group like that?
That's usually, I think we are mostly driven by the commercial outcomes of it. So
nice. Okay. Well, you are a bank, so fine. There you go. So you're in that field. Where do you think some of the secret, if you're going to give advice, we've probably got two sorts of audience members here. One might be people who are interested in data science and looking to get and progress in the field. And then others are maybe the business people and even the security people who go, what type of questions should I be asking of our CDO? Maybe let's start with those in the field and looking to progress. Is it just a matter of diving into, say, the Azure and AWS frameworks, or do you need to go a bit more granular in terms of study? How do you get into this field, and what type of skill sets do you think you need?
Yeah, so I would typically start with like the spectrum I mentioned, and the data has different aspects to it. There are governance people, engineers, data scientists, and finally people who are more of the analysts or the decision scientists. So where do you like to play in, and what would your strength be? Is something the first assessment I typically help people with is understanding what do you enjoy doing. Do you enjoy bringing data in? Do you enjoy turning it into action, or do you enjoy talking to business? And what is it that you enjoy? Like I clearly enjoy the last part of it, which is making somebody use it and feeling happy about it. So basis that, there are then different pathways that you can go in. But the one typical advice I give people is just jump in. And if something doesn't work, you can always move to the next one because it's all interrelated. So at least you would have learned something. It's nothing goes to waste. You've learned something. And you feel like that's not the place to be in. You don't want to be a data scientist anymore. You want to be more of an analyst. It's fine. You pick skills up that can then be transferable. So it's people wait for that perfect opportunity. That's what I advise them. Just jump in and do it. And for the enterprise that wants to ask questions of their chief data officer or their data person, I often say, ask as many tough questions as possible. And that's makes our job rewarding because we feel like we're not solving the daily mundane problems. It's okay. No question is a dumb question. Ask questions like what is X doing and Y doing and why. And so when we ask those questions, we soon realize that we don't even track a lot of these things because we're so focused on tracking the basics, and we have focused on managing the infrastructure, architecture, and all of the stuff that all of that is just answering one question out of the 10 questions you have. And then you stop and take a pause and reflect and say, wait a minute, what is the point of just tracking all of this if I can't answer 9 other questions that my business has on how to do better? So the first thing to do is ask tough questions and say, I don't care. I have this question. Why don't we track it, or why can't we do it? And then at least start the conversation on how do we do that better.
What's been one of the sort of the key sort of problems that you've solved in that, and maybe where do you find this sort of heading from the business? I mentioned structured and unstructured data and data sets themselves. Maybe if we could dive into that that part on how much are you using with machine learning and potentially AI, or are you more using it from a business intelligence and reporting framework, or do you find you start to do both?
So it's a mix of everything, right? So business intelligence is the gateway for people to touch data. If they can't see it and touch it, they don't see it exists. So that's the first. So that's where you start all the time. But then one business intelligence becomes stale really quick because it's mostly retrospective. It tells you what has happened, not what to do or how to do it. And the what to do and how to do it is the part where the machine learning comes in. But the business wouldn't know any different because the BI interface will not only tell them what happened, but what to do and how to go about their daily jobs better. And that's the evolution that we typically do. Is we get people to start using a particular tool or a framework, then we start surfacing more and more smarter insights and ask people to ask us tough questions so we can surface that. And that's how we do it. But while we do that process, it then means in the back end, we do a lot of work in terms of bringing more data sources in and making sure that they're governed right and they're done the right way. But that's typically our approach to doing it. So be it structured data or unstructured data, it shouldn't really matter to the end user. The end user has a business question. She wants an answer. She gets an answer in her hand, on a phone or on the laptop that she's using. She gets the answer in whatever form. She just has to ask a question, and everything else happens in the background and it's abstracted away from it.
And one of the questions I was thinking of the market verticals on this, are you doing much on the AI machine learning process? And is that driven towards sort of the customer level or the business level as well, or again, maybe a bit of both?
So it's definitely a bit of both, but it definitely starts mostly at the customer level. A lot of personalization for customers in terms of, so in my previous role in the retail world, we did a lot of personalization for customers on what they want to buy. Retail stores are the best examples of understanding customer needs and tastes and customizing for their own needs and preferences. But in the finance world, it's more around what is the next best thing for you, what is the next best offer for you, what is the next best rate for you, and personalizing it so that you don't have to go through the hassle of applying for the whole process all over again. So personalizing that is what we're trying to do, understanding your needs and then targeting you or in a responsible fashion so that we are doing all the right things and not talking to all the people all the time. So that's one thing we're doing. But also from a process point of view, there are a lot of operational efficiencies you can gain from operational research algorithms. And that's another thing we're doing. Could be workplace rostering, could be in terms of where to invest the next marketing dollar in, or it could be understanding what is the best message that resonates with somebody in terms of a media pitch. Those are things that we're also trying to use machine learning for.
Maybe two questions. One on what some of the key tools that you use. You don't have to mention brands, but you're welcome to, in terms of what tool sets or platforms you use. And then two, maybe the ethics and privacy aspect. Given your knowledge in this field, are you a bit concerned over where things are heading in terms of data and the granular level we can get? Does that concern you at all, or do you just find we will kind of find a nice balance between security, privacy, and then convenience and self-awareness, I suppose, of data?
Sure thing. So in terms of tools, we use mostly we use open source tools for all our problem solving, and it's very polyglot. Everyone's a polyglot. People use R, Python, Scala. We also use SAS for some of our regular decisioning processes. This is all the intelligence side of things. And for BI, we use a combination of tools. So depending on the infrastructure that we have, we use a particular tool that works for our infrastructure. And mostly data engineering happens in Airflow and stuff like that. So that's typically our lay of the land. And we have data catalogs where we're using some up-and-coming Australian companies that are building data catalogs like Kara.ai, which have some really good data catalogs, intelligence-driven data catalogs, which pretty much can act like a Google Maps for data. So that's something we use. And to your other question on privacy and ethics, I think my concern is if we don't focus on it, somebody else will then misuse it. So instead of saying not you, my pitch is always there are two schools of thought. One is don't use AI, don't track this data, don't do this. And the other school is track everything, do everything, but make sure you have the right framework for it. Because pretending the problem doesn't exist does not make the problem go away. Somebody's going to still do it and do it in a bad way. So bringing it in and making sure it has the right guardrails. For example, in every business I've worked in, we don't target people based on who they are, i.e. age, gender, or their preferences, but we target based on what they do, which is basically what is your interest, what do you express, and what do you do. And the best example I've always given is in the retail world, I won't target a lady based on her age. So an 80-year-old can shop like an 18-year-old, and I'll target her for an 18-year-old behavior, not an 80-year-old behavior.
But you don't know that she's 18. It's more on the behavior and interest, right?
Yeah. So and that basically is what customers are asking. To customers are saying, treat me well, give me personal experience. Don't discriminate against me because who I am, but show me stuff because of what I do and what I need. And that's exactly what data should be used for.
Yeah.
Those frameworks need to come in. So how do you make sure the algorithms are not biased? How do you make sure the data sets are not biased? How do you make sure you have the right conversations? That's part of the ethics framework that we are trying to come up with.
Do you think that's possible, Kshira, in terms of getting rid of that unconscious bias in data sets that we, sort of older data sets, legacy data sets, it's going to be in there. We can't help it.
No, it definitely is going to be in there. So therefore, if you have a framework, the framework will tell you what questions to ask. If your questions will be, why is this variable always coming up as a key parameter? And then you dig it in, and then somebody will come, some subject matter expert would come and say, my God, this should not be there. So I think if you don't have a framework, you don't know what questions to ask and no way to measure and monitor it. So for example, in one of my previous slides, we had a framework where it would monitor all the algorithms. And if one variable kept coming up as a key discriminator to make a difference, we would pull it out and see why is it so. Is it really because that behavior is different, or is it just a latent customer attribute expressed as a behavior?
Yeah.
If somebody uses an expensive phone, that obviously means they are, say for example, they are well off. So just because they use a phone, you can't target them. Maybe it's a latent proxy for their social status. So that's not how you should be doing it. So asking questions like that will only happen if you have that framework.
Do you think we can embed ethics into AI?
We definitely can, and there is a lot of work happening right now to do that. It's just that it's all happening in its own way. There is no standardized way to do it, and I'm hoping in the next few years that's something that will come up. Because to enforce it and enable it, you need the right platforms and the right guardrails. And the best example I can think of is if you drive down the road, it says 40 on a school zone, you drive in 40. Nobody will force you to drive at 40. You know you need to drive at 40 else you get a ticket. We don't have a framework like that. There is no speed signs for AI. Everyone's driving everywhere else.
True.
And that speed signs is all we need. And how do we define those speed signs and how do we enforce it? Where do we put the cameras in? How do we put the ticket collectors in? Those are things that we need to think about.
Yeah. Do you think there's still quite a bit of work there, though? We have what they call the black box of AI that sometimes we don't understand what it's doing.
Yeah.
Is that something that we should be aware of and avoid when we don't understand what an AI is doing? Maybe have a moratorium on it of we shouldn't be using stuff we don't understand?
Yeah, it should definitely be on that, and it should also be what are the outcomes of it and measuring if the outcomes of it are detrimental or otherwise. AI explainability is becoming a key thing in almost all areas that it might be a group. Everyone's talking about that now because given the explosion of cloud-based tools has made everyone can become an AI engineer now. All they need to do is spin up a cluster, open up a credit card, and start doing it.
Yeah.
So it's no longer about that. It's about asking those questions on how did you do it. And can you explain why you made this decision? And that explainability is becoming crucial and key.
One last question. We did an interview on data visualization. It was called Telling a Complex Tale. It's I think it was RMIT. I might pull it up and give a link in. But they're basically taking large data sets, particularly from, say, criminal investigations, and then creating a narrative of the data. And so a new investigator that comes on can get told automatically what that data said and what the crime is, and a bit of a briefing. Data visualization and narrative tools. Are you using that from a business perspective? And are you just creating a dashboard? Where do you find the trends and the sort of the capability in visualization and narrative tools for data?
Yeah. So that's a good question, right? A lot of visualization is still graph-based and table-based right now, just for the lack of not enough interest in doing it. So people still think data means they want to see a graph and a table, but you're right. Where I see some players making a massive difference, where they bring in a UX designer or a human experience designer. Say, all of this is great, but what is the decision that the end user is going to make? If she wants to know, should I put money or not put money? Should I talk to him or not talk to him? Whatever it is, that's all it should be, and it should then justify that with data. Like you spoke about the investigative reporter, instead of it being tables and graphs, I think there's slowly a progression away from it to say what the outcome is. You look at a dashboard, like you look at a speedometer, it doesn't tell you how fast the engine is running and all. It just tells you how fast you're going and if you should slow up or slow down. That's all we need. And so that's something that we are trying to, that's becoming an increasingly smaller subdiscipline within the BI space, which is UX and more UX elements in it.
Yeah, interesting. Are you in that sort of augmented virtual realm with your data sets, or are you still on graphs and pie graphs?
We're still on graphs and tables, and that's a journey we need to take, and we need to go on the journey.
I mean, that'll be very exciting itself, isn't it? Once you start to be able to visualize, and I have seen it, I think it's at Sydney University, where they start to visualize data in 3D models, hologram type approaches. Fascinating field. So look, obviously this is an exciting journey for you. How long have you been in the industry out of interest?
More than a decade now.
Okay, well then that's all right. If you had said 5 years, I would have been jealous, but more than a decade means that you've been working hard at it. Look, Kshira Saagar, am I saying that correctly?
Yep.
Saagar, it's spelled differently, but it's a cool name. Kshira Saagar, your Chief Data Officer with Latitude Financial Services. Absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you very much for that, and we'll put this out as a separate interview on our Tech and Sec Weekly. Pleasure. I hope to have you back.
Cheers. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Good on you, mate. Thank you.